Good evening, members, officers, people joining on Zoom. Nice to see you all. I'm Councillor Jamie McIver. I'm your chairman this evening. This is the meeting of the Stronger Council Select Committee on Thursday the 21st of July. This meeting will be webcast, and members are reminded of the need to activate their microphones before speaking, and the chairman will read the following announcement now, which is that I'd like to remind everyone present the meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing and other use by such third parties. If you are seated in the lower public seating area, it is likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in the possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should move to the upper public gallery. Everyone all right with that? Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillors Heather and Rackham.
Thank you. Any other apologies? No. Item 3, substitute members. Are there any substitutes?
Yes, Chairman, we have Councillor Balcombe for Councillor Heather.
Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does any members have any interest they'd like to declare? No? Okay, item 5, notes of the previous meeting. Members, are you happy for me to sign the minutes of the previous meeting as a true and accurate record? Oh, so I can see Councillor Bassett has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, declarations of interest. I've got to declare that I'm a non-exec member of Qualis, and any item where it's discussed, I will keep my comments to myself, shall we say.
Thank you, Councillor Bassett. Your interest is noted. Apologies for missing you. And there was no other... Does anybody have any issues with the minutes? They were all agreed. Yeah, we're happy to move on. Brilliant, thank you. So then we go on to item 6, which is the terms of reference on our work programme, which is found on pages 11 and 14 on your agenda pack. First of all, members, may I just ask who has been a member of this committee prior to this civic year? Okay, so we have one member, so that your knowledge may be invaluable on this particular part of the agenda. Obviously, this is and Councillor Brooks as well, I see you waving your hand. Of course, this is an opportunity, and Councillor Bassett waving his hand as well. so we have lots of experienced members on this committee. This is a good opportunity for anything that you think was really important to obviously remain a big part of the work programme. Of course, there are the obvious matters, but of course, lots has happened both internally and externally in recent times. So if there is anything that members would like to see added to the work programme, of course, now is a very good opportunity to have those discussions. Has anybody got anything particularly they would like to raise at this moment? Any matters they'd like to see added to the work programme? What I was also going to suggest was, I'm just looking at anyone on Zoom that would like to come in with any matters for the work programme. Something I'm happy to put to members is there has been a lot of discussion about officer attendance in meetings by Zoom, and also there's been some discussion about amongst members, not just of this committee, but generally about, particularly in planning meetings. My suggestion was going to be whether we could look at digital involvement of officers and whether it is now something we should continue or whether it's something we should review. Is there any members that wish to support that idea? Okay, so if I go to Councillor Brooks.
Jamie, I think it is timely to do that because we've had very mixed experiences, particularly in our planning committee, of virtual involvement of officers. And particularly planning is a bit different, I think, from just this general discussion about other council matters. Sometimes you just to have someone in the room, even if they then have to refer to someone else, which has happened in Plan South, has been really helpful, particularly for the less experienced officers. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. And I agree. I think now is a good time to do that. And Councillor Bassett?
So can I agree with that? I think one of the problems, as you say, in planning is when it's remote, you do get a bit detached from the officers and don't really get much chance to discuss things. And I think it is very useful obviously we meet officers before meetings, after meetings, and we just build relationships. When it's all done remotely, it does get a bit difficult. So having said that I'm not actually in the meeting tonight, I am remote, but I'm sure we can sort that out.
Thank you, Councillor Bassett. And the acoustics of the room as you just came in there also kind of highlights why this is something we may want to look at. So if members are happy to agree that we will look into adding to the work programme something to do with officer attendance in meetings via Zoom and also perhaps the technology associated with it. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Thank you, Chair. It's certainly something that we can look at, but and probably look at all meetings rather than just specifically planning. Okay.
I think what we'll do in time for the next meeting, we'll sort of clarify the wording and exactly what we'll cover so that we can propose that properly at the next meeting, because we have got lots of items on the work programme anyway. Any other members that wish to raise anything on this item of the agenda? Okay, so is everyone happy if we... Oh, Councillor Kane?
I just wanted to remind the Chairman and the committee that there is a project in train at the moment looking at the sound system and the acoustics in this room. We have a project in flight. It's costed. It needs to be progressed to resolution.
Thank you. Okay, so if we're happy to move on to the next item, which is our People's Strategy, which is on pages 15 to 22, and this will be led by Paula McGuinness. It's a verbal report.
Thank you, Chairman. The report provides the committee with an update on the People's Strategy, which runs to March 2023. The new strategy is being reviewed at this current time and is in draft, so that will be considered by our senior managers and presented to the committee when that has been finalised. So I thought I'd just provide the committee with some highlights from the report. It is a detailed report, but I just thought if I'd picked out some of the highlights for you. The report states that the People team will be focusing on recruitment. As members are probably aware, we're currently in a tight labour market, particularly around senior technical and technical roles. So there is a spotlight on recruitment. So we are supporting that with some additional resource. iTrent continues to be developed, and for those members who are not aware, iTrent is our HR and payroll system. So for employees, it has a new look and feel following a recent upgrade for our employees. And there's also been some additional functionality regarding the use on mobile devices. Our onboarding process have been greatly enhanced, making the new starter feel welcomed and included within the council. And this part of functionality in iTrent, it does continue to be developed, hopefully improving their interaction with the council before they actually start with us. Our leadership programme has come to an end, and the People team has received positive feedback regarding the programme that's been delivered. Excuse me, the report also sets out a range of development and resources that are available to all of our employees, and also touches on our apprenticeship cohorts that go from strength to strength. By the end of September, we will have 92 of our employees trained as mental health first aiders, and this is so important when considering the health and well-being of our employees. In March of this year, we delivered our third pulse survey, which is known as Work Buzz, and we saw 57% of our employees completing the survey. And the report goes on to highlight some of the feedback that we'd received as part of that survey. And we've actually just closed our Creating Our Tomorrow survey, and the results for that are due very soon. We extended it for a little time, for about a month, so we're working on the results at this moment in time. So in terms of our internal communication team, work has started on a new information platform in old money known as the intranet. And the project group is working with our employees to ensure that the platform is fit for purpose and what they need. The report sets out the types of campaigns that the internal comms team has been involved with. The team are working to provide an organisation-wide messaging function using Teams, and the benefit of this is to cut down on email communications and blocking people's email addresses. And lastly, we held an employee event at the beginning of July. This had been deferred twice due to COVID, and the aim was for employees to come back into the building to meet up, to network, to meet colleagues where people had been recruited during COVID, and spending more time in our new offices. And the early feedback for that event indicates that it was a great success. So thank you, Chairman, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report. I can see Councillor Brooks on Zoom wanting to come in, and Councillor Bassett and Councillor Whitehouse. If we start with Councillor Brooks.
Thank you very much, Councillor McIvy. One of my questions when I read the report, and I do occasionally look at the council website from time to time and see the list of vacancies, is are we experiencing a higher level of turnover than you would normally expect for the first half of the year?
Thank you, Chair. We're not experiencing higher levels of turnover. It's comparable with other organisations.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Bassett.
Thank you. Just a few little comments here. We mention on page 15 the resourcing apprentice, and it would have been on the 15th of July. Get many applications?
I'm not sure, Councillor Bassett. I can find out and put that in the minutes.
Okay, and a little bit of the old buzzwords crept in there, and I know Councillor Kesky did mention this at the last meeting, but can someone tell me what HRBP power hours are?
Is that another local government acronym we're going to learn this evening?
No, I think it's for EFDC. It's HR Business Partners. So they lead the session in, and that's one of our development resources. So they take our managers and staff through various issues.
Okay, and next one is on page 18, Creating Our Tomorrow. Should this actually go to councillors as well? Because obviously we're going to be heavily involved in tomorrow.
The survey, Councillor Bassett, was focused on hybrid and agile ways of working and what our workforce understood by those terms and how they wanted to work. So I don't think the level of questions in this particular survey would have necessarily suited members at this point.
And final one. See, I actually read the minutes. is there wasn't a lot about member interaction throughout all of this, and it can get quite confused going on and what we need to do where. But perhaps a member presentation on all the buzzwords, what all the systems are, what they do, especially for members of JC, where some of these items might get pulled up and discussed.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bassett. I had picked that up from the minutes just this evening. What we'll do is we'll put together a glossary and attach it to the minutes for next time, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, and I think that would be very useful, and I think it might also be touching on something Councillor Bassett has said about having a bit of an insight into any specific roles or specific departments that are finding it hard to recruit. And obviously, I imagine some of that may be commercially sensitive, but for those matters that aren't, if there's anything we can scrutinise in that area, if there's any particular departments that have a need and are also finding it hard to fill the need. Councillor Whitehouse?
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, I'm grateful for what's in the report. So I notice the emphasis on recruitment. It'd be helpful for context to have a sort of clear idea of sort of how many vacancies the council is carrying at the moment and how many sort of temporary and interim staff it's had to use rather than recruiting to permanent to vacancies. And are there any vacancies we decided that we just can't or won't fill?
Thank you, Councillor Whitehouse. We are currently going through an exercise to identify where we've held vacancies for a while as part of the finance process, but we can certainly bring together vacancies and temp interim positions and perhaps with some context around that, whether it's waiting to be advertised or there's difficulties with recruitment, etc.
No, that'd be helpful. I mean, anticipating the financial report later on, it talks about various savings through holding vacancies and delaying recruitment and so forth. And be helpful to know to the extent that's a sort of deliberate, decision in order to sort of bring the budget down, and to what extent that's to meet service needs, and to what extent that's sort of an accidental byproduct of just not being able to find people.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hadley? Councillor Hadley, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. How many people in the people team?
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. We have a number of apprentices. We have got 1, 2, 3, probably 8. 8. And 8, yes, sorry.
Other point, agile approach. Have you used this method of project work before, as opposed to the normal task and timescale approach?
Not necessarily in the people team, but we have in the organisation. And apologies for the terminology, but it's a difference between what's known as a waterfall approach, which is that linear. You have an action plan and you move through that process, as opposed to agile, which is around building the project on feedback and continuous review. So there's a slight difference, but certainly we felt that working, doing the intranet project, that was a worthwhile method, and we've have support from the project management office when doing that.
Coming back, as a person who's used project management all my life and the traditional way of doing it, I get a bit worried that the agile approach might be classed as making it up as you go along for some people. I hope that isn't the case, but you can be assured there'll be some beady eyes on you.
Yes, certainly. In this, it probably suits this particular project because it is about building the intranet for staff. So it's about building an alpha and a beta model before being released into the organisation, and then improving on the back of, excuse me, our employees' comments. But there is a BDI, and we've got meetings in the diary that we have regular catch-ups on that particular project.
I thought Councillor Hadley might be describing the way I'm chairing my meeting with that approach. Councillor Whitehouse and then Councillor Phillip.
Thanks, Chairman. The other question I wanted to ask about is the legal team restructure, which is the first item in the report, and I noticed also came up at the meeting last time. Can you just sort of say a bit more about what the new structure is and what that will, what we can expect to see as a result of it to resolve whatever issues there were that you're trying to address?
There's currently 4 posts that have gone out to advert, and actually the closing date is this coming Monday, and they are of a sufficient seniority, backed with market comparable salaries. So we are hoping that we will get a good response, and the posts will be in specialist areas. So there is a litigation lawyer, there is a planning lawyer, there'll be support for housing, and the other one escapes me, so I do apologise. But also within those roles, there will be a deputy monitoring officer and deputy data protection officer to provide the head of legal services with that level of support at that higher level, more so than what we have at the moment. So that's what we wanted to achieve: resilience for the team, resilience for the organisation, and have that level of legal advice open to EFDC officers and management.
Could I follow up with one thing? I mean, how do we ensure that governance and legal issues are fully taken into account? I mean, last time I looked at the structure chart, the sort of head of legal monitoring officer was not one of the senior officers, or on whatever the corporate board is, or it's called these days. I mean, how do we make sure that those issues are fully taken into account?
The head of legal certainly has unfettered access to, and being in the monitoring officer role, has unfettered access to senior managers. She sits on the corporate governance meeting, which is the group of senior officers plus audit. The role reports directly into me, but she has that autonomy, and she will attend those meetings to ensure that her role as monitoring officer is fulfilled. Does that answer your question? Of you? Sorry. Okay.
I can see Georgina's just raised her hand. Is it to do with this matter? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to give assurance to the committee that regardless of the professions and where they sit within the organisation, the way that the senior management team work and the structures work is that the specialism sits at the table, not the rank that they sit at. So it's very much a flat and open structure, and where and we're not guided by levels and people's ranks in the organisation, but the professions and the skills that they bring. So it's and I think Paul has named all of the governance groups that the monitoring officer specifically sits at, and that's the way that this organisation's run.
Thank you. Councillor Patel and then Councillor Phillip.
Yeah, just a really quick question was, so we were talked about the employee survey, which was at 57%. Is that a normal figure, or is that low, high?
Apologies. Yeah, sorry. It's fair to middling, that type of, we would be looking at probably about 65 to 70%, but what I will say is that it continues to improve. So each time we have run a survey, we have got a better response to the surveys.
And how often are these surveys carried out?
We have the work buzz surveys that are a pulse survey, so they're very short, and they have a number of questions that then can be tracked, and they happen every quarter. And then we have the annual survey, which is creating out tomorrow, which this one focused on the hybrid working.
Okay, Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman. I was coming back to Councillor Hadley's perhaps unfortunate comments. I would say that if you took an old-fashioned approach to project management, not looking at agile, it would be equivalent to saying you're quite happy to keep your organisation back in the 20th century at best. Agile is a well-recognised, properly controlled system which actually tends to lead to more rapid and better results at the end than the old-fashioned one. Not to say the waterfall method doesn't still have some applications, but in general it tends to take longer and be more liable to result with something at the end, which is not what you wanted when you started.
Thank you, Councillor Phillip. Any other members on this particular report? No? Thank you very much for that report, Paula. So we now move on to item 8, which is the Azure move to the cloud, in other words, technology. And I'm going to invite Steve Jennings to provide that verbal report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is basically about the future strategy for IT at Epping Forest District Council, and based on recommendations through our corporate strategy and also government strategies for IT within public bodies. I'd like to first of all give a little bit of context as to where our IT structure is at this moment in time. So basically every IT system that Epping Forest, or pretty much everyone, there are some that are currently hosted, are based in a single data centre in the civic offices down on the ground floor. This data centre is coming up to its 5-year renewal, so there will be costs for the replacement of the hardware and the replacement of the air conditioning and UPS, which is uninterruptible power supplies. So there is a major cost for replacing those. The government advice is to look at moving, where you can, systems into a cloud-based or hosted environment for a number of reasons. The data centre down on the ground floor was seen as a major risk during the building works to this building because it was a single point of failure. If, for instance, the building was set alight by the builders, unfortunately, then the data centre could have been destroyed. The council would have been completely without any IT structure. So that was a major risk. It's still a risk, but during those building works, it was a major risk. And then thought processes were put into place as to how we move forward by moving services into a cloud environment. The cloud environment is going to be a disparate cloud environment, so the risk will be minimised by the loss of a single data centre. But this particular report is specifically to do with the core services that provide our infrastructure. So it doesn't include housing and planning systems, for instance. And the report goes through in detail as to how we carried out this process, who our partners will be, costings. There will be savings over a 5-year period, and the reasoning why we actually need to do this. There's also an appendix at the end that talks about relative costs for moving to Microsoft Azure as opposed to another environment such as Google. Hopefully the report is fairly self-explanatory, but I'm quite happy to answer questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that report. Members, Councillor Hadley, I can see you.
Thank you, Chair. A few comments here. The word trainer.
Oh, your microphone, Councillor Hadley.
On reading the report, I didn't see the word end user training appear very often? Unless you're telling me there's none required.
So end user training will be no different. This is infrastructure only. So this is where the systems actually live. The systems themselves, as far as the users are concerned, will be exactly the same. So they won't change. Only from the point of view of their computers will need to be reconfigured to point to the new systems, but the user experience should be no different.
Councillor Hadley.
But we know when you run something off the cloud, there are certain applications which are brain dead compared to their local desktop application. And I'm thinking about Excel, which doesn't have the full functionality of the one on your desktop. That's why when you're in the cloud, you download the Excel version so you tap away, then upload for collaboration and editing. So that is a difference, because anybody who goes in the cloud thinking the Excel version of the cloud is the same as the downloaded one, just not true. Also, things like graphics packages, you run them locally, you don't run them on the cloud, which you know, obviously, because when you move your mouse, you expect the pointer to move like that. And you know, the strength of the cloud is also one of its weaknesses. It is dependent on the internet. And we all know we get slow internets when the kids come home from school at 3:30 and they're all playing games, and you think, what's happening here? It didn't mention that in that report. And I think if it's going to Cabinet, those sort of things ought to be mentioned. Also, I totally agree with the concept going to the cloud, but just that particular item and the slow service is possible, as we know. And the internet does go down as well. So it's a couple of risks which ought to be in your risk table at the end, to my mind anyway.
Okay, so the core applications such as Microsoft Office, email, they will remain on corporate devices. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes there can be a lag if you're doing something that's very if you're manipulating a spreadsheet, for instance, or a database, it is possible, especially if you've got a slow link in your own home. But the core Office suite will remain on a device local to the user, so there will be no change to that. And there are the benefits that managing the devices, managing the way that users work from the cloud, from within the cloud, is actually much more beneficial than doing it from within the data center. And to be honest, we almost are in a cloud environment now anyway, because the majority of people are working from home across what's called a VPN link. It's a secure link across the internet. So we're almost already working in a hosted environment anyway, by the fact that so many people are working from home. A lot of the applications that we're moving to are designed to be used in the cloud. They minimize the amount of data flow between the user and the back-end services. So they try to minimize as much as possible any effect of the internet. So personally, I don't see that there will be a major issue with performance, to be honest.
Councillor Hadley?
If I just come back on that one, I just feel that maybe you mentioned that the main Microsoft applications will be held locally. That didn't come across clearly to me in that report. And maybe for the sake of the Cabinet, it might be just worthwhile reminding them that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Kane?
Hopefully I can help with a simple analogy. If you think of the plumbing in your house, the operation of the sink and the operation of the shower and the operation of the bath, the toilet, will remain exactly the same. What we're changing here is the actual pipework and where the water is stored. That's what we're changing, not what you use, where the data comes from, where it's stored and how it's delivered.
Councillor Phillip?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to, I think Councillor Hadley may be making a degree of confusion between hosting the servers in the cloud and software as a service. I think what he's talking about in terms of Excel spreadsheets not having the same functionality is Microsoft's cloud offering of Excel, which is a software as a service hosted on the cloud. What's being talked about here is actually taking our own servers and putting them on virtual servers stored somewhere within, I guess because of GDPR, probably within the UK. That actually everything else is the same. As Councillor Kane said, it's a case of taking your water storage tank, taking it out of your own particular loft and putting it in the water storage tower just outside Church Langley in Harlow.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Patel has a question.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. So I've also noticed, even in this one for Project Plan, I know Councillor Phillips' strong recommendation on using Agile, so I just sort of picked up on this one. It says a phased waterfall approach on this one as well. Is there a reason why that's chosen over Agile as well? Or maybe it's actually better functionality? I don't know. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
So on the project plan, page 10, on the project plan, page 10, this is a phased waterfall linear approach will be adopted for delivering this project. Is that one Agile? I didn't think it was. Or perhaps it needs to be like that, I don't know.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Perhaps if we're not sure on the answer on that particular question, we could look at a written answer between now and the next meeting, if that's all right. Yeah. On that particular, perhaps we'll, after the meeting, get the proper question in place for a proper written answer. Councillor Whitehouse.
Yeah, no, the one question I had was obviously it's a fairly major project, and how are you going to ensure that you can support all the, you know, what I might call the business as usual stuff of supporting, you know, the IT users in the council, while also having enough resource to implement all this?
So this is a large portion of the work will be carried out by our preferred partner during this period. Every transfer into Microsoft Azure has a Microsoft agreed partner, and we've used Agilicis, a company called Agilicis. So they will be partnering with us. They will be doing the large portion of the work of transferring into the cloud, with the assistance of certain officers within the IT team. And the way that it works is that you run in a parallel environment. So the services stay within the data center. They are copied across to the Azure environment, and then only when they've been tested, and if there is a risk to the service being disrupted, it will be carried out in out of hours. But because Agilicis have got is one of the many companies who have got very in-depth experience of transferring into the cloud, we see that risk is minimised.
Okay, any other members with a question? No? Thank you very much, Steve. Of course, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you are. So, no other questions, members. Then we'll move on to item 9, which is the Q4 budget monitoring for 2021, I believe it is 22, pages 25 to 38. And I invite Chris Hartgrove to speak.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Item 9 on the agenda then, the Q4 budget monitoring report for 21-22, which also represents the outturn for the full financial year, is contained in your report pack on pages 25 to 38. The figures presented are embedded in our recently published draft statement of accounts for 21-22, which are currently the subject of the annual external audit process. So the outturn, I must advise you, is still technically provisional, should I say, until such time as the accounts are signed off by the auditors. But notwithstanding that, then on to the detail. The report presents the quarter four or outturn position for 21-22. In other words, 12 months ended the 31st of March 2022, and covers both the general fund and the housing revenue account positions. The extreme volatility triggered by the pandemic experienced in 2021 gradually receded as the 21-22 financial year progressed, with financial activity resuming to pre-pandemic levels in most areas, albeit with some notable exceptions. Despite some uncertainty during the year, previously reported to this committee, the fear of a budget overspend was eventually averted with a general fund revenue surplus of 992,000 recorded at year end. Further good news came in the form of general funding differences and accounting adjustments identified as part of the closure of accounts process, ultimately negating the need to utilise the 1.35 million in general fund reserves assumed within the budget. The net effect of that being that the £4 million minimum contingency balance, which has been adopted by the Council, has been protected, which at least provides a more solid base than we might have expected as we head into the 22-23 financial year, and the impact of spiralling inflation on the budget for this year. I'll not dwell on that one for now, as I'll be reporting that at quarter one, in the quarter one forecast to this committee, the next committee meeting. But suffice to say, there are some sufficient challenges there, and the £4 million balance will hold us in good stead. The general fund net expenditure differences by service division are summarised in the table at the top of page 27. Just to pick out one or two of the highlights explained in paragraph 2.3 on pages 28 and 29. First of all, commercial and technical services recorded an overspend of 379,000. It was a volatile year for this service, I think it's fair to say, with quarter four bringing significantly better news than the previous three quarters, most notably with a one-off savings of 235,000 identified on the waste management contract, which made a big difference to the outcome on waste management. However, within the service overall, bad news still outweighed good news, unfortunately, with car parking experiencing a budget pressure of 275,000, and similarly the land and property budget recording an overspend of 589,000, driven by a range of both cost and income pressures on commercial property. However, and in contrast, in fact, customer services recorded a 705,000 underspend, and the dominating factor here was the additional court costs for non-payment of council tax and business rates of 719,000 was raised in 21-22 compared to zero in 2021 when the magistrates' courts were closed for prolonged periods during the pandemic. I must emphasise that this is an exceptional item caused by the release of an unprecedented backlog of cases that had built up during that period and is unlikely to be repeated in the future. It's also a further symptom of the bounce back in local tax collection rates as the pandemic has receded. A range, I won't go into loads of detail, but a range of other significant ups and downs have also been experienced during the year, which are also highlighted in paragraph 2.3 on pages 28 and 29, the majority of which have been covered in previous updates to the committee. This includes additional revenue from HRA recharges and a Garden Town contingency that was not required in the end, being offset by a shortfall in Qualis income and additional contributions to the corporate bad debt provision. Turning to the housing and revenue account position then, section 3 beginning on page 29, this was also a further good news story overall, with a significant surplus of 2.059 million being recorded for the year, which is a key part of the transition to the new HRA business plan. with the 21-22 surplus supporting the 22-23 budget. The HRA is, however, not without its cost pressures, as presented in the table on page 30. In particular, the cost of repairs and maintenance continues to be a challenge. The Council had previously drawn upon an earmarked repairs fund in recent years to support budget overspends in this area, which to an extent, and I must stress unintentionally, masked the underlying cost of housing repairs. That fund is no longer required under the contractual arrangements with Qualis, which leads to a much flatter payment. And more realistic budgets have been included for 22-23, which should go some way to addressing the problem, at least in budget terms. And finally, capital spending. The General Fund Capital Programme begins at section 4 on page 32. This shows the General Fund spending for the year of 25.7 million against a budget of 72.4 million. The largest item of spend was 19.8 million on capital loans to Qualis, which of course generated a net revenue stream to the Council's General Fund. However, this was 41.2 million below budget. This was the primary driver behind the revenue shortfall noted above earlier. And finally, the Housing Revenue Account Capital Programme, section 5, beginning on page 33. Capital spending on the HRA was once again dominated by housing development, with total spending of 11.646 million in the year. This included 8.678 million on physical house building in 21-22, compared to 4.869 million in 2021. So it is increasing. However, total slippage on the housing development programme was 12.86 million, and that's primarily due to planning delays, especially on phases 4.3 and 4.4 of the programme. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that report. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Whitehouse.
Thanks. Yeah, a couple of things, if I may. I mean, the first is really just a comment, but sort of going back to the point earlier on vacancies. I mean, if I've added up right, about £500,000 of the savings come from vacancies, and that's where I think it's important that we understand which of those are sort of one-off savings, which are potentially continuing savings because the vacancies aren't needed, and indeed which vacancies are hampering the delivery of services or the delivery of projects. But I was going to ask if you could expand a bit on the change in the waste management spending, which is obviously a positive movement. Is it the volume of recycling or the value of recycling that's made the difference, and is that something that's expected to continue into the current year? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, just to take both those points then, the salary savings, a large proportion of them are dominated by project slippage, so it's a case of delaying recruitment to actually resource projects. So it's not a case of not delivering services, it's just the actual timing differences in terms of recruiting project resources. So that's the most sort of dominant theme, rather than ongoing service delivery staff savings. So that's the first point. The waste management spending, it was identified later on in the financial year that one of the payments, the regular payments, got out with the waste management contract provider, BIFA. Sorry, memory shift, slippage there. With BIFA, got out of sync during the pandemic, and it turned out that they owed the council 225,000, I think it was, which was rectified in the fourth quarter of this financial year, which led to a one-off boost in the position on waste management. With regards to recycling income, I am not sure of the finer points of that, other than the Q3 projection was more pessimistic than it actually turned out to be at the year end.
Thank you. Any other members of a question? No, I mean, I did. Councillor Bassett.
Yeah, sorry. Firstly, can I thank the officers for their hard work in doing something which has been an incredibly difficult year just to guess what's going to happen next. And this has been all through the year. But I am slightly concerned by the great differences from forecasts to actuals in many areas. Are we more confident this year that what our budget planned to be will actually be the amounts? Because this year it's worked out in our favour, but next year it might not. So have we got a larger degree of confidence in what we're going to forecast for next year?
Chairman, if I might.
Yes, Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Councillor Bassett. If Councillor Bassett remembers, fairly early on in the year, I indicated that we had, as a result of the work that we did in the closing the previous year, realised that we're coming into last year with much lower balances than we had intended to have, and as such the need to pull in, the ability to pull in 1.35 million from our reserves was going to give us a situation at the end of the year where our balances would be much below what they needed to be. As a result, I worked with my cabinet colleagues, and they worked with their various areas to try and significantly reduce the spending that we did last year to actually try and bring it in under budget. So yes, we are under budget, and that is at least partially due to us bringing in things to make sure that we didn't have to use that 1.35 million of reserves, because that gave us a much more secure footing coming into this financial year than previously. I've always said that our budget should be a ceiling. We shouldn't, under any circumstances, go over that budget if we possibly can, and we at all times should try and come in under budget. So the budget is a target for us to get to. The fact that we've come in under budget is a good news story, and I would sincerely hope that the work that goes on in the council over the coming months will give us the ability to come in under budget again this year, because you may have heard me say this before, but last year's budget was difficult. This year's budget is going to be more difficult. I don't think we need to point out to everybody the challenges that we've got with inflation throughout the country at the moment. But then how often do you have a global pandemic followed by a war? Not very often, I would hope. Maybe it's like climate change, it'll come back more often, but hopefully not. So we are in a really challenging position, and anything we can do through this year to make us going into next year's position in a better way will be a very positive thing, because if it's not, budget in February is going to be quite an interesting night.
Thank you, Councillor Fair. I think pandemics are once in every 100 years, and wars should be once in a lifetime, if any, and sadly both have gone slightly wrong on this occasion. Councillor Whitehouse.
Thanks. Yes, I found the other question I wanted to ask, if that's all right. I just wondered if Ms Hartgrove could expand a bit more on the land and property changes. I mean, in particular, I didn't quite understand the late cancellation of rental invoices. Were those invoices, well, if you just explain what that is about, and in general, the lower rental income, is that because it's been harder to fill vacant properties, or because rents have been coming in at sort of lower levels than we expected?
Unfortunately, I don't have the detailed answer to that, but there were a number of invoices cancelled at the year end, and that was based, I believe, around miscellaneous properties where the wrong invoices were raised for the wrong person for the wrong amount, and that sort of thing. It was a list of smaller amounts and sort of some catch-up work undertaken by the asset management team. So that came out, emerged late in the financial year during the fourth quarter, so, which is why it wasn't reflected in the quarter three projections. I'm not familiar with the precise details, but I'm happily report those back.
Councillor Phillip.
Inquiries.
Oh, your microphone. Sorry.
So, in terms of the asset management, we have had a number of challenges on a number of properties throughout the pandemic, not least with not having any recourse to the courts in terms of people who were failing to pay what they should have been. It has to be said that the vast majority of our challenges have actually been with multinationals rather than with our local businesses. Our local businesses have done their very best to make sure that they continue to pay. We also had issues with our bad debt system that we're looking at now. Those have now been resolved, and we're getting a much better grip on what rental income is due and when it should be due. So I'm really hoping that come this time next year there won't have been the same surprises over rental arrears that there were. Again, the courts are back up and running again, so we have that final string to our bow should we need it, and that's what will hopefully encourage those people who would prefer not to have their names appearing in the newspapers as being a multinational that's not paying their ways, and that will give us the ability to be more secure on that. It has to be said that overall our rent roll and the work that's been done through the asset management team is certainly firming up significantly in this year, and we're doing a good job has been done on that, and it should be a more secure and more realistic position. It is worth noting that our rent roll is well north of 130 million a year, so even a small change in there does make a significant change overall.
Thank you, Councillor Phillip. I was just going to touch on I think you may have just mentioned it, the invoice errors that were made. Is that partly a technological error as opposed to short staff from COVID or anything?
There are a whole number of little things that work together. The system was certainly part of it. Therefore, you had mistracked invoices. Therefore, when they came in, they were potentially aligned to the wrong account. So instead of paying off, say, a chunk of your rent arrears, they were assigned to business rates, for example. So you did get a degree of that confusion because the tying up was not being done. We're really doing our best to make sure that is not a situation that propagates into this year.
That sounds like a headache to sort out. Councillor Whitehouse.
When will we know whether or not it's a problem or not this year?
At the risk of sounding like Dick Cheney and talking about known unknowns and unknown unknowns, the indications are that it's working correctly. It's being tracked. My asset management team reports back regularly to a group of councillors a group of the cabinet looking at that with senior management involvement as well. The trend is in the right direction. Will it still be a problem next year? At the end of the year, I don't know yet. I'm sincerely hoping that it won't be, but until we are quite confident that we've been through a significant period of time with the system working, that there is not an unknown issue in there. So I can't give you an absolute cast iron guarantee, but the right things are being done in an agile manner to make sure that we don't get into the situation again.
Okay. Any other members wish to speak? Anyone on Zoom? No? Okay. Okay, members, if there's no other matters to be addressed on that, thank you, Chris, for that report. Then that takes us on to item 10, which is dates of future meetings. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 1st of September 2022. So I'd like to thank officers, all three officers who gave reports. Thank you for being here in person. Thank you to three members of the Cabinet for being here this evening, and of course to members both in the chamber and on Zoom. Thank you to my lovely Vice Chairman, who elected in May and is Vice Chairing a meeting already. And I wish you all a very safe summer, and we'll see you in September. Stay hydrated, and I close the meeting at 8 o'clock.